81 renal regulation of potassium, calcium, phosphate, and magnesium. Extracellular fluid potassium concentration is normally regulated at about 4.2 milliequivalents per liter, seldom rising or falling more than plus or minus 0.3 milliequivalents per liter. So K plus is maintained at 4.2 milliequivalents per liter. You write K like this, okay? This is how you write 2 and this is how you write 4, so 4.2 milliequivalents per liter. This precise control is necessary because many cell functions are sensitive to changes in extracellular fluid potassium concentration. For instance, an increase in the plasma potassium concentration of only 3 to 4 milliequivalents per liter can cause cardiac arrhythmias, and higher concentrations can lead to cardiac arrest or fibrillation. A special difficulty in regulating ECF K plus concentration is the fact that more than 98% of the total K plus is contained in the cells and only 2% is contained in the ECF. Okay, for a 70 kg adult who has about 28 liters of intracellular fluid, or that is 40% of body weight, and 14 liters of extracellular fluid, that is 20% of body weight, about 3920 milliequivalents of potassium are inside the cells and only about 59 milliequivalents are in the ECF. Okay, as we said, 4.2 milliequivalents per liter is the ECF concentration of K plus 4.2. Okay, if you take 40 and subtract 1 from it, you get 39, and 2 is normal, so 3920 milliequivalents per liter is inside the cell and 59 are in the ECF. Also, the potassium contained in a single meal may be as high as 50 milliequivalents, and the daily intake usually ranges between 50 and 200 milliequivalents per day. Therefore, failure to rapidly rid the ECF of the ingested potassium could cause life-threatening hyperkalemia, which is increased plasma potassium concentration. Likewise, a small loss of potassium from the ECF could cause severe hypokalemia, which is low plasma potassium concentration in the absence of rapid and appropriate compensatory responses. Okay, the amount of K plus excreted in the feces is only about 5 to 10% of the potassium intakes. That is why the maintenance of normal potassium balance requires the kidneys to adjust their potassium excretion rapidly and precisely in response to wide variations in intake, as is also true for most other electrolytes. Control of potassium distribution between the ECF and ICF compartments also plays an important role in potassium homeostasis. Because more than 98% of the total body potassium is contained intracellularly within the cells, the cells can serve as an overflow site for excess extracellular fluid potassium during hyperkalemia, or as a source of potassium during hypokalemia. Thus, redistribution of potassium between the intracellular and extracellular fluid compartments provides the first line of defense against changes in ECF K plus concentration. Coming to the regulation of internal potassium distribution, after ingestion of a normal meal, ECF fluid potassium concentration would rise to a lethal level if the ingested potassium did not rapidly move into the cells. Okay, most of it is 98% is within the cells, right? So as soon as it is ingested, it needs to move from the ICF into the intracellular compartment. Okay. For example, absorption of 40 milliequivalents of sodium, the amount contained in a meal rich in vegetables and fruit, into an ECF volume of 14 liters, okay, would rise the plasma potassium concentration by about 2.9 milliequivalents per liter if all the potassium remained in the ECF. Fortunately, most of the ingested potassium rapidly moves into the cells until the kidneys can eliminate the excess. Okay, so in this table we can see some of the factors that influence the distribution of potassium between ECF and ICF. Okay, so factors that shift K plus into the cells and cause homeostasis, they increase intracellular K plus and cause homeostasis or normal state of the body. They include insulin, aldosterone, beta adrenergic stimulators, and alkalotic conditions. Okay, whereas factors that cause harm by shifting K plus out of the body, out of the cells, that is insulin deficiency, aldosterone deficiency, beta adrenergic blockage, and conditions such as acidosis or cell lysis or strenuous exercise. Okay, now coming to an overview of renal potassium excretion, it is determined by the sum of three processes: rate of potassium filtration, that is GFR multiplied by the plasma potassium concentration, the rate of potassium reabsorption by the tubules, and the rate of potassium secretion, filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. The normal rate of potassium filtration by the glomerular capillaries is about 756 milliequivalents per day. You can remember it as 5, 6, 7, and it is just rearranged. GFR 180 liters per day multiplied by the plasma potassium concentration, which is 4.2 milliequivalents per liter, which gives us 756 milliequivalents per day potassium filtration. This rate of filtration is relatively constant in healthy persons because of the autoregulatory mechanisms for GFR discussed previously and the precision with which plasma potassium concentration is regulated. Severe decreases in GFR in certain renal diseases, however, can cause serious potassium accumulation and hyperkalemia. Okay. So about 65% of the filtered potassium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. Okay, see, this is what we're talking about. The kidneys, they try to filter excess potassium out. They cause potassium excretion so that in the body, in the ECF compartment, you have very little potassium. Okay, but if there is any renal disease, the kidneys cannot excrete out the proper amounts of potassium. ECFK plus concentration increase, and this causes hyperkalemia. Okay, in renal diseases. Now, 65% of the filtered potassium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. Another 25 to 30% is reabsorbed in the loop of Henle, especially in the thick ascending part, where potassium is actively co-transported along with sodium and chloride, Na plus K plus 2Cl minus co-transporter. In both the proximal tubule and the loop of Henle, a relatively constant fraction of the filtered potassium load is reabsorbed. Changes in the potassium reabsorption in these segments can influence potassium excretion, but most of the day-to-day variation of potassium excretion is not due to changes in reabsorption in the PCT or loop of Henle. There is also some potassium reabsorption in the collecting tubules and collecting ducts. The amount reabsorbed in these parts of the nephron varies depending on the potassium intake. Okay. So coming to the potassium secretion by the principal cells, okay, here we can see normally the balance of potassium. Normal potassium intake is about 100 milliequivalents per day. Okay, 3920 is in the ICF and 59 is in the ECF. Okay, and then the K plus output is also 100 milliequivalents per day. So what all you take is again lost. More of it is in the urine, 92 milliequivalents per day, and feces 8 milliequivalents per day. Okay. Now, the cells in the late distal and cortical collecting tubules that secrete potassium are called the principal cells. Principal cells secrete potassium, P for P, and make up the majority of epithelial cells in these regions. Okay, so in this figure you can see the basic cellular mechanisms of potassium secretion by the principal cells. So secretion of potassium from the blood into the tubular lumen is a two-step process, beginning with uptake from the interstitium into the cell by the sodium-potassium ATPase pump in the basolateral membrane. Okay, this pump moves sodium out of the cell into the interstitium and at the same time moves potassium into the interior of the cell. The second step of the process is passive diffusion of potassium from the interior of the cell into the tubular fluid. Okay, the sodium-potassium ATPase pump creates a high intracellular potassium concentration, which provides the driving force for passive diffusion of potassium from the cell into the tubular lumen. The luminal membrane of the principal cells is highly permeable to potassium because there are two types of special channels that allow potassium ions to rapidly diffuse across the membrane. BK, that is high conductance, big potassium channels. Big for because they have higher conductance, and also ROMK, that is renal outer medullary potassium channels. K for potassium. Renal outer medullary potassium channels, that is ROMK and BK channels. Both types of potassium channels, they are passive transporters. They are required for efficient renal potassium excretion, and their abundance in the luminal membrane is increased during high potassium intake. Coming to the control of potassium secretion by the principal cells, the primary factors that control potassium secretion by the principal cells of the late distal and cortical collecting tubules are the activity of the sodium-potassium ATPase pump, the electrochemical gradient for potassium secretion from the blood to the tubular lumen. As you can see here, it is about minus 70 millivolts. Okay, and also the permeability of the luminal membrane for potassium, which is influenced by the BK and the ROMK channels. Okay, these three determinants of potassium secretion are in turn regulated by several factors. Now coming to the major factors that regulate potassium, the most important factors that stimulate potassium secretion by the principal cells include increased ECF potassium concentration, okay, which causes secretion and which results in excretion, increased aldosterone, and also increased tubular flow rate. One factor that decreases potassium secretion is increased H plus ion concentration or acidosis. Acidosis decreases the potassium secretion. Okay. Now coming to increased extracellular fluid potassium concentration, it stimulates potassium secretion. The rate of potassium secretion in the late distal and cortical collecting tubules is directly stimulated by increased ECF K plus concentration, leading to increases in potassium excretion. This effect is especially pronounced when the extracellular fluid potassium concentration rises about 4.1 milliequivalents per liter. slightly less than the normal 4.2. Increased plasma potassium concentration therefore serves as one of the most important mechanisms for increasing potassium secretion and regulating extracellular fluid potassium ion concentration. Increased dietary potassium intake and increased ECF-K plus concentration stimulate potassium secretion by four mechanisms. Increased ECF potassium concentration stimulates the Na plus K plus ATPase pump, thereby increasing potassium uptake across the basolateral membrane. This in turn increases the intracellular K plus ion concentration, causing potassium to diffuse across the luminal membrane into the tubule. Increased ECF-K plus concentration increases the potassium gradient from the renal interstitial fluid to the interior of the epithelial cell. This reduces back leakage of potassium ions from the inside of the cells through the basolateral membrane. Increased potassium intake stimulates synthesis of potassium channels of BK and ROMK channels specifically, and their translocation from the cytosol to the luminal membrane, which in turn increases the ease of potassium diffusion through the membrane. And also increased potassium concentration stimulates aldosterone secretion by the adrenal cortex, which further stimulates potassium secretion. Now, aldosterone, it stimulates potassium secretion. It stimulates active reabsorption of sodium ions by the principal cells of the late distal tubules and collecting ducts. This effect is mediated through a sodium-potassium ATPase pump that transports sodium outward through the basolateral membrane and into the renal interstitial fluid. At the same time, it pumps potassium into the cell. Thus, aldosterone also has a powerful effect to control the rate at which the principal cells secrete potassium. A second effect of aldosterone is to increase the number of potassium channels in the luminal membrane and therefore its permeability for potassium, further adding to the effectiveness of aldosterone in stimulating potassium secretion. Okay. So here in this figure, we can see the effect that aldosterone has on potassium ion concentration. Okay. So you can see as the plasma aldosterone concentration increases, okay, the urinary potassium excretion also increases. Okay. So this is what is shown here, the effect of aldosterone and the effect of extracellular K plus concentration. As the extracellular K plus concentration keeps increasing, the rate of potassium excretion also keeps increasing, but aldosterone speeds up this process. Now, increased extracellular potassium ion concentration stimulates aldosterone secretion. In negative feedback control systems, the factor that is controlled usually has a feedback effect on the controller. In the case of aldosterone potassium control system, the rate of aldosterone secretion by the adrenal gland is controlled strongly by the ECF potassium ion concentration. So this figure shows that an increase in the plasma potassium concentration of about 3 to 5 milliequivalents per liter can increase plasma aldosterone concentration from nearly 0 to as high as 60 nanograms per 100 ml, a concentration that is almost 10 times the normal. Okay. That is why if ECF extracellular concentration increases, it also increases the plasma aldosterone synthesis. At the same time, the excretion. Now, the effect of potassium ion concentration to stimulate aldosterone secretion is a part of a powerful feedback system for regulating potassium excretion, as shown in this figure. In this feedback system, an increase in the plasma potassium concentration stimulates aldosterone secretion and therefore increases the blood level of aldosterone. Okay, so when the K plus concentration increases, it stimulates the increase in blood level of aldosterone. Okay, this is block 1. The increase in blood aldosterone then causes a marked increase in potassium excretion by the kidneys. Okay, which is block 2. K plus excretion is increased. The increased potassium excretion then reduces the extracellular fluid concentration back towards the normal. Okay, this cycle and this normal condition right here. Okay, thus this feedback mechanism acts synergistically with the direct effect of increased extracellular potassium concentration to elevate potassium excretion when potassium intake is raised. Coming to increased distal tubular flow rate, it stimulates potassium secretion. A rise in the distal tubular flow rate, as occurs with volume expansion, high sodium intake, or treatment with some diuretics, it stimulates potassium secretion, as you can see in this figure. Okay, so in this figure, you can see what we previously discussed. Increase in K plus intake increases plasma K plus concentration, which causes an increase in blood level of aldosterone, which increases K plus secretion by the principal cells and also causes K plus excretion, and that is what happens. Okay, now coming to this graph, so rise in the distal tubular flow rate. Okay, as you can see, the rise in the distal tubular flow rate, as occurs with volume expansion or high sodium diet or treatment with some diuretics, it stimulates potassium secretion. Okay, as tubular fluorate increases, it stimulates potassium secretion. The effect of tubular fluorate on potassium secretion in the distilled and collecting tubules is strongly influenced by potassium intake. When the potassium intake is high, increased tubular fluorate has a much greater effect to stimulate potassium secretion than when potassium intake is low. Okay, there are two effects of high volume fluorate that increase potassium secretion. When potassium is secreted into the tubular fluid, the luminal concentration of potassium increases, thereby reducing the driving force for potassium diffusion across the luminal membrane. With increased tubular fluorate, the secreted potassium is continuously flushed down the tubule, so the rise in tubular potassium concentration becomes minimized and the net potassium is increased. Secretion is increased. A high tubular fluorate also increases the number of high conductance BK channels in the luminal membrane. Although the BK channels are normally quiescent, they become active in response to increases in fluorate, thereby increasing the conductance of potassium across the luminal membrane. The net effect of increased tubular fluorate is especially important than in helping to preserve normal potassium excretion during changes in sodium intake. For example, with a high sodium intake, there is decreased aldosterone secretion, which by itself would tend to decrease the rate of potassium secretion and therefore reduce urinary excretion of potassium. However, the high distilled tubular fluorate that occurs with a high sodium intake tends to increase potassium secretion. Therefore, the two effects of high sodium intake, decreased aldosterone secretion, and the high tubular fluorate counterbalance each other, so there is little change in potassium excretion. Likewise, with the low sodium intake, there is little change in potassium excretion because of the counterbalancing effects of increased aldosterone secretion and decreased tubular fluorate on potassium secretion. Acute acidosis, it decreases potassium secretion. Acute increases in H plus ion concentration of the ECF reduce potassium secretion, whereas decreased H plus ion concentration or alkalosis increases potassium ion secretion. The primary mechanism by which increased H plus ion concentration inhibits potassium secretion is by reducing the activity of the sodium potassium ATPase pump. This reduction in turn decreases intracellular potassium concentration and subsequent passive diffusion of potassium across the luminal membrane into the tubule. Acidosis may also reduce the number of potassium channels in the luminal membrane. With more prolonged acidosis lasting over a period of several days, there is an increase in the urinary potassium excretion. The mechanism for this effect is due in part to an effect of chronic acidosis to inhibit proximal tubular sodium chloride and water reabsorption, which increases the distal volume delivery, thereby stimulating potassium secretion. This effect overrides the inhibitory effect of H plus ions on the sodium potassium ATPase pump. Thus, chronic acidosis leads to a loss of potassium, whereas acute acidosis leads to a decreased potassium excretion. Coming to the beneficial effects of a diet high in potassium and low in sodium content, for most of human history, the typical diet has been one that is low in sodium and high in potassium content compared with the typical modern diet. In isolated populations that have not experienced industrialization, such as the Yanomamo tribe living in the Amazon of northern Brazil, sodium intake may be as low as 10 to 20 millimoles per day, while potassium intake may be as high as 200 millimoles per day. This intake is due to their consumption of a diet containing large amounts of fruits and vegetables and no processed foods. Populations consuming this type of diet generally do not experience age-related increases in blood pressure and cardiovascular diseases. With industrialization and increased consumption of processed foods, which often have high sodium and low potassium content, there have been dramatic increases in sodium intake and decreases in potassium intake. In most industrialized countries, potassium consumption averages only 30 to 70 millimoles per day, whereas sodium intake averages 140 to 180 millimoles per day. Experimental and clinical studies have shown the combination of high sodium, low potassium intake increases the risk for hypertension and associated cardiovascular and kidney diseases. A diet rich in potassium, however, seems to protect against the adverse effects of a high sodium diet, reducing the blood pressure and the risk for stroke, CAD, and kidney disease. The beneficial effects of increasing potassium intake are especially apparent when combined with a low sodium diet. Okay. So these are the dietary guidelines published by various international organizations. They recommend reducing dietary intake of sodium chloride to around 65 millimoles per day, while increasing the potassium intake to 120 millimoles per day. Okay. Now this is what happens when you increase sodium intake. Aldosterone is decreased, but GFR it increases, and also distal tubular flow rate it increases. Okay. So because distal tubular flow rate is increasing, excretion increases. Aldosterone is decreasing, so excretion of K plus decreases, and both of these they counterbalance the opposite effects, and there is unchanged K plus. Control of renal calcium excretion and extracellular calcium ion concentration. Extracellular fluid calcium ion concentration normally remains tightly controlled within a few percentage points of its normal level, that is 2.4 milliequivalents per liter. When calcium ion concentration falls to low levels, that is you can remember 2.4 like this. Ca, the charge is plus 2, right? So 2 and 2 times 2 is 4, so 2.4 milliequivalents per liter. When calcium ion concentration falls to low levels, that is hypocalcemia when it occurs, the excitability of nerve and muscle cells increases markedly, and this can in extreme cases result in hypocalcemic tetany. This condition is characterized by spastic skeletal muscle contractions. Okay, hypercalcemia depresses neuromuscular excitability and can lead to cardiac arrhythmias. About 50% of total calcium in the plasma exists in the ionized form, which is the form that has biological activity at the cell membranes. The remainder is either bound to the plasma proteins, that is about 40%, or complexed in the non-ionized form with anions such as phosphate and citrate, which is about 10%. Changes in plasma hydrogen ion concentration can influence the degree of calcium binding to plasma proteins. With acidosis, less calcium is bound to the plasma proteins. Conversely, in alkalosis, a greater amount of calcium is bound to the plasma proteins. Therefore, in patients with alkalosis, are more susceptible to hypocalcemic tetany. Hypocalcemic tetany, al for alkalosis. Patients with alkalosis are more susceptible to hypocalcemic tetany because in alkalotic conditions, the plasma proteins they bind extra calcium ions. Okay. As with other substances in the body, the intake of calcium must be balanced with the net loss of calcium over the long term. Unlike ions such as sodium and chloride, however, a large share of calcium excretion occurs in the feces. The usual rate of dietary calcium intake is about 1000 mg per day, with about 900 mg per day of calcium excreted in the feces. Under certain conditions, fecal calcium excretion can exceed calcium ingestion because calcium can also be secreted into the intestinal lumen. Therefore, the GI tract and the regulatory mechanisms that influence intestinal calcium absorption and secretion play a major role in calcium homeostasis. Almost all the calcium in the body, 99%, is stored in the bone, with only about 0.1% in the ECF and 1% in the ICF and cell organelles. The bone therefore acts as a large reservoir for storing calcium and as a source of calcium when ECF calcium concentration tends to decrease. One of the most important regulators of bone uptake and release of calcium is PTH. Okay, calcitonin decreases the plasma calcium levels, whereas parathormone increases the plasma calcium concentration. When ECF calcium concentration falls below the normal, the parathyroid glands are directly stimulated by the low calcium levels to promote increased secretion of PTH, which then acts directly on the bones to increase the resorption of bone salts, to release the salts from the bones, and also to release large amounts of calcium into the ECF, thereby returning calcium levels back to the normal. When calcium concentration is elevated, PTH secretion decreases so that almost no bone resorption occurs. Instead, excess calcium is deposited in the bones. Thus, the day-to-day regulation of calcium ion concentration is mediated in large part by the effect of PTH on bone resorption. The bones, however, do not have an inexhaustible supply of calcium. Therefore, over the long term, the intake of calcium must be balanced with the calcium excretion by the GI tract and the kidneys. The most important regulator of calcium resorption at both of these sites is PTH. Thus, PTH regulates the plasma calcium concentration through three main effects: by stimulating renal calcium plus 2 absorption. Okay, it increases the rate of calcium reabsorption in the kidneys, and then it causes calcium resorption from the bones. Okay, and also it stimulates the activation of vitamin D, which then increases the intestinal reabsorption of calcium. Okay, now coming to the control of calcium excretion by the kidneys, calcium is both filtered and reabsorbed but not secreted. Calcium is not secreted. Therefore, the rate of renal calcium excretion is calculated as filtered calcium minus reabsorbed calcium. Only about 60% of the plasma calcium is ionized, with 40% being bound to the plasma proteins and 10% complexed with anions such as phosphate. Therefore, about only 60% of the plasma calcium can be filtered at the glomerulus. Normally, about 99% of the filtered calcium is reabsorbed by the tubules, with only about 1% of the filtered calcium being excreted. About 65% of the filtered calcium is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, and 25 to 30% is reabsorbed in the loop of Henle, and 49% is reabsorbed in the distal and collecting tubules. This is similar to that of sodium, and that is the inference you need to take. Calcium excretion is adjusted to meet the body's needs. With an increase in calcium intake, there is also increased renal calcium excretion, although much of the increase of calcium intake is eliminated in the feces. With calcium depletion, calcium excretion by the kidneys decreases as a result of enhanced tubular reabsorption. Coming to PCT reabsorption of calcium, most of the calcium reabsorption in the PCT occurs through the paracellular pathway. That is, it is dissolved in water. Okay, it is dissolved in water and it is carried with the reabsorbed fluid as it flows through the cells, between the cells. Okay, this is paracellular transport. Only about 20% of PCT calcium reabsorption occurs through the transcellular pathway in 2 steps. Calcium diffuses from the tubular lumen through the electrochemical gradient down the gradient due to much higher concentration of calcium in the tubular lumen compared with the epithelial cell cytoplasm, and because the cell interior has a negative charge relative to the tubular lumen. And also calcium exits the cell across the basolateral membrane by a calcium ATPase pump and by also sodium calcium counter transporter. Okay. So the loop of Henle and distal tubule calcium reabsorption. In the loop of Henle, calcium reabsorption is restricted to the thick ascending limb. Approximately 50% of calcium reabsorption in the thick ascending limb occurs through the paracellular route by passive diffusion due to the slight positive charge of the tubular lumen relative to the interstitial fluid. The remaining 50% in the thick ascending limb occurs through the transcellular pathway process that is stimulated by PTH. In the distal tubule, calcium reabsorption occurs almost entirely by active transport throughout the cell membrane. So you can remember it like this. In the PCT, most of it occurs through the paracellular pathway, and only 20% occurs through the transcellular pathway. It diffuses down the electrochemical gradient into the cell, and then it exits through the calcium ATPase pump and the 3 sodium ion 1 calcium ion counter transporter. In the loop of Henle, again 50% is paracellular and 50% is transcellular, but in the distal tubule, most of it is active, but almost entirely it is active transport. The mechanism for this active transport is similar to that in the proximal tubule and thick ascending limb. It involves diffusion across the luminal membrane through calcium channels and exits across the basolateral membrane by a calcium ATPase pump as well as a sodium calcium counter transport mechanism. In this segment, as well as in the loop of Henle, PTH stimulates calcium reabsorption. Vitamin D and calcitonin also stimulate calcium reabsorption in the thick ascending limb of Henle's loop and in the distal tubule. Although these hormones are not as important quantitatively as PTH in reducing renal calcium excretion. Coming to the factors that regulate tubular calcium reabsorption, one of the primary controllers of renal tubular calcium reabsorption is PTH. Increased levels of PTH stimulate calcium reabsorption in the thick ascending loops of Henle and the distal tubules, which reduces the excretion of calcium. Conversely, reduction of PTH promotes calcium excretion by decreasing resorption in the loops of Henle and DCT. In the PCT, the calcium reabsorption usually parallels sodium and water reabsorption, and it is independent of PTH. Therefore, in instances of extracellular volume depletion or increased arterial pressure, both of which decrease the proximal sodium and water reabsorption, there is also a reduction in the calcium reabsorption and consequently increased urinary excretion of calcium. Conversely, with extracellular volume contraction or decreased blood pressure, calcium excretion decreases primarily because of increased proximal tubular reabsorption. Another factor that influences calcium reabsorption is the plasma concentration of phosphate. Increased plasma phosphate stimulates PTH, which increases calcium reabsorption by the renal tubules, thereby reducing calcium excretion. The opposite occurs with reduction in plasma phosphate concentration. Calcium reabsorption is also stimulated by metabolic alkalosis and inhibited by metabolic acidosis. Acidosis tends to increase calcium excretion, whereas alkalosis tends to reduce calcium excretion because in alkalotic conditions, plasma proteins bind to calcium, reducing its free form to be excreted. Okay, most of the effect of hydrogen ion concentration on calcium excretion results from changes in calcium reabsorption in the distal tubule. The factors that decrease calcium excretion and increase the plasma calcium concentration. So we have increased parathormone, which increases calcium concentration in the plasma. So whenever plasma extracellular fluid volume of calcium increases, this causes calcium to be excreted out. When blood pressure increases, it causes an increase in the GFR, and hence calcium is again excreted out at the glomerular level. And plasma phosphate, it prevents calcium from being excreted. We know that. This is mentioned incorrectly. Alkalosis causes the calcium ions to bind with the plasma proteins, so it decreases excretion of calcium. Acidosis increases calcium excretion. Vitamin D3 also increases plasma calcium concentration and then decreases the calcium excretion. So, coming to the regulation of renal phosphate excretion by the kidneys is controlled primarily by an overflow mechanism that can be explained as follows. The renal tubules have a normal transport maximum for reabsorbing phosphate of about 0.1 millimoles per minute. When less than this amount of phosphate is present in the glomerular filtrate, when less than 0.1 millimoles per minute is present in the glomerular filtrate, essentially all of the filtered phosphate is reabsorbed. When more than this amount is present, the excess is excreted. This is the overflow mechanism. Therefore, the phosphate normally begins to spill into the urine when its concentration in the ECF rises about a threshold of about 0.8 millimoles per liter, which gives a tubular load of phosphate of about 0.1 millimoles per minute, assuming a GFR of 125 ml per minute. Because most people ingest large quantities of phosphate in milk products and meat, the concentration of phosphate is usually maintained above 1 millimoles per liter, a level at which there is a continual excretion of phosphate into the urine. The proximal tubule normally absorbs 75 to 80% of the filtered phosphate. The distal tubule absorbs only about 10% of the filtered load, and only very small amounts are reabsorbed in the loop of Henle collecting tubules and collecting ducts. Approximately 10% of the filtered phosphate is excreted in the urine. In the PCT, phosphate reabsorption occurs mainly through the transcellular pathway. Phosphate enters the cell from the lumen by a sodium phosphate cotransporter and exits the cell across the basolateral membrane by a process that is not well understood but may involve a countertransport in which phosphate is exchanged for an anion. Changes in tubular phosphate reabsorptive capacity can also occur in different conditions and influence phosphate excretion. For instance, a diet low in phosphate can over time increase the net reabsorptive transport maximum for phosphate, thereby reducing the tendency for phosphate to spill over into the urine. Parathormone can play a significant role in regulating phosphate concentration through two effects. Parathormone promotes bone resorption, thereby dumping large amounts of phosphate ions into the ECF from the bone salts, and PTH decreases the transport maximum for phosphate by the renal tubules, so it increases the excretion. A greater proportion of the tubular phosphate is lost in the urine when the threshold or the transport maximum is decreased. So thus, whenever plasma PTH is increased, tubular phosphate reabsorption is decreased and more phosphate is excreted. Finally, coming to the control of renal magnesium secretion and extracellular magnesium ion concentration, more than one half of the body's magnesium is stored within the bones. Most of the rest resides within the cells, with less than 1% located in the ECF. Although the total plasma magnesium concentration is about 1.8 milliequivalents per liter, more than one half of this is bound to plasma proteins. Therefore, the free ionized concentration of magnesium is only about 0.8 milliequivalents per liter. The normal daily intake of magnesium is about 250 to 300 mg per day, but only about one half of this intake is absorbed by the GIT. To maintain magnesium balance, the kidneys must excrete this absorbed magnesium, about one half the daily intake of magnesium, or 125 to 150 mg per day. The kidneys normally excrete about 10 to 15% of the magnesium in the glomerular filtrate. Renal excretion of magnesium can increase markedly during magnesium excess or decrease to almost nil during magnesium depletion, because magnesium is involved in many biochemical processes in the body, including the activation of many enzymes. Its concentration must be closely regulated. Regulation of magnesium excretion is achieved mainly by changing the tubular reabsorption. The proximal tubule usually reabsorbs only about 25% of the filtered magnesium. The primary site of reabsorption is the loop of Henle, where about 65% of the filtered load of magnesium is reabsorbed. Only a small amount, usually less than 5% of the filtered magnesium, is reabsorbed in the distal and collecting tubules. The mechanisms that regulate magnesium ion excretion are not well understood, but the following disturbances lead to increased magnesium excretion. Increased ECF magnesium concentration causes increase in excretion. ECF volume expansion and also ECF volume calcium concentration, when both of them increase, there is an increase of magnesium ion excretion as well.